Call this meeting to order. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pretty please take the attendance.
Mayor, we have all council members present tonight, but Tilton Burn participating by Zoom.
Thank you. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda. So moved.
Second.
Move second. Would you please call the roll?
Avery.
Aye.
Duran. Aye. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Rasmussen.
Aye.
Stecker. Aye. Tilton Burn. Tilton Burn. Unmute.
Aye.
Wendell.
Aye. Okay. Moving on to item 4, open forum. Is there any member here wishes to address the council on an item not listed on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on. Item 5, presentation. Proposed changes to the floodplain development ordinance. Charlie Richter, our city engineer, will review this item.
Where do I stand?
Not used to this setup.
Yeah, sit up here.
And good evening, council. I'm here to talk about proposed changes to the floodplain development ordinance that the city of Brookings has. We're coming here on request by city council to review our city floodplain ordinance. So we've done extensive research into what other communities have for a floodplain ordinance and see how that may apply to best be applied to Brookings. I've got Craig Clarkson from ISG here to assist with the presentation. He's assisted us with developing our changes that we want for our floodplain ordinance. And I'll hand it off to him in a minute. As we all know, and as we've seen over the last several years in Brookings, there's been significant issues that we've seen with flooding. Some of it which is we can attribute to some climate issues that we've seen. There's more extreme events that we've seen over the past several years. And we want to be able to help address that to account for that. We've also had extensive modeling that we've done for the city that we've seen significant changes to areas of the city that are impacted by flooding that we want to be able to address with these changes that we have with the floodplain ordinance. I'll hand it off to Craig Clarkson, who can explain some of these slides in front of you to go over the floodplain changes.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. As a part of the look at the ordinance is just keeping up with change, and I have a couple slides here to talk about a little bit of that. So this is a special report done in 2017 that looked at precipitation data over the last 50 to 60 years. And what they're seeing in our region here is, and you can see in the dark green is where the highest amount of change and additional precipitation is. So particularly in the spring and fall here, over the last 50 to 60 years, we've seen an increase of up to 15 and in some cases even higher than 15% more overall rainfall in general. We go to the next slide there.
Did I break it?
There we go. All right. But not only are we in this region, are we seeing more rainfall, but the pattern in which it falls is different too. We're getting more rainfall in shorter amounts of time. And so this just shows a 20-year return period, which is a pretty high intense event. And over the same period of data, we're also seeing about 0.3 of an inch more rainfall at that 20-year return period. That may not sound like a lot, but that equates to about 1,000 acre feet in the 6 Mile Creek watershed where it meets about the airport here in Brookings. So significant amount of water that, that change has seen, so. That kind of sets up the stage for, you know, why we're looking at some of these, floodplain development requirements.
So, currently, the city of Brookings has a, freeboard requirement, which is the minimum height above the base flood elevation that the lowest elevation of the structure can be. So right now, we require 1 foot above the base flood elevation for the lowest portion of the structure. The lowest floor of the structure. So we wanted to take a look at that and see what we could do to enhance the protection for people who live within the floodplain. So we've looked at several other communities, including Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Corralville, Iowa, Des Moines, and then Sioux Falls. Each of those has a higher freeboard requirement than the city of Brookings. So as you can see, the 2 places on top in Iowa have a freeboard requirement of 2 feet. Where communities like Des Moines and Sioux Falls has a requirement of 3 feet, which would be a significant change from what the city of Brookings has. But then you can take a look at the graphic below, what that reduction would, that requirement would have possibly with a reduction in the premium people would see in their floodplain insurance. So a freeboard of 2 feet you could see a possible reduction of up close to 50% of it in the premium that people would see in their floodplain insurance.
Charlie, I had a question. When you say that you raise the level 2 feet, is that assuming that we're at the base elevation to start with, or what if we have a place where it needs 5 feet of fill to get to 2 feet above? Is that still?
And so it would be 2 feet above the base flood elevation. So for a 100-year event, what would the floodplain look like? So where's the standing water in the 100-year storm event? And then it would be 2 feet above that.
But how much fill, is there a limit on how much you can put in? My question is, if you've got a place where, say, it takes 3 foot of fill just to bring it up to the base elevation, can you add 2 feet, so you're really putting 5 feet of fill in there?
With this ordinance change, there wouldn't be a limit.
That seems like maybe something there should maybe be some restrictions.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think in the next few slides, you'll see what we're trying to do to combat that.
Okay, yeah, because see, like, on that kind of theory, the only reason you have a place that you can't build on because you don't have enough fill. Just find some more fill and you could do anything.
Right, and and it will be a limitation, right? Because you need to be able to have access to your house too, right?
Mhm.
So you would have to bring in significant fill if you wanted to take a significant portion out of the floodplain. So, but you'll see in the next few graphics what we're trying to do to combat that very thing. So this is just the proposed language that we're having for the change in freeboard. So what we're recommending with this change is a change from a 1 foot to a 2 foot freeboard. We see that, especially with the way climate has changed and the accuracy of the mapping that FEMA has, we felt that a 2 foot freeboard would provide a significant increase in protection for properties.
I would just add, in hearing some of the discussions with the consultant and staff, that after studying our floodplain, we know that it's wide, right? And not as deep. And so with it being as wide, not like these other towns that have 3 or more feet of requirement, we could go to 2 feet, still feel safe with that 2 foot because it is so wide. I guess
Right.
you want to add to that?
It just takes a lot more flow to increase the floodplain here in Brookings than it would somewhere maybe in downtown Sioux Falls where that floodplain is almost completely gone. So you get a lot more flow and it raises up a lot quicker than it would here where our floodplains are nice and wide.
All right, so you want to explain compensatory storage?
Yeah, so, compensatory storage is, it's really a watershed protection, ordinance. It's where the previous ordinance really focused on the individual property, protecting that property for the future and building that resiliency into the property. This is really more watershed focused ordinance, and knowing that our floodplains serve a vital role in storing the water from a volume perspective, but also a water quality perspective. As we start to encroach and fill in those portions of the floodplain, no longer is that vital storage there. It's pushing that flow downstream a lot quicker with a lot more energy. And so not only is it impacting your neighbors, your downstream neighbors here in Brookings, but also those neighbors in Sioux Falls and everybody downstream from us from here. So this is an ordinance that a lot of communities are adopting. Essentially it says if you are going to fill in the floodplain, then you must compensate for that storage that you have filled into that, so that you are having no negative impact as a result of the development.
So in a way, we're trying to combat, pushing one person's problem onto another.
So Charlie, is this where it impacts, what Councilmember Wayne was talking about? Regarding adding more, land to the area, they'd have to take out more somewhere else, is that what you're?
That's correct. So this is a way to combat these significant fills in, the floodplain. This would, the developer who wanted to put a significant fill in would have to find an area that's close by to take that material out. So to provide the same amount of storage in the floodplain as you were putting it.
Does that include streets too? Or if streets end up having to be elevated to get to the development? Do you have to find that spot somewhere else for this backfill?
Yes, it would pertain to that. So any fill into the floodplain, you'd have to provide compensatory storage.
And this, maybe a month ago, we had that one rezoning in the southwest corner of Brookings that was in a flood or wetlands.
The timberline?
Yeah,
No. Harmson, okay.
and there was some discussion that you can buy wetlands from some other bank or nationally, like if you destroy one wetland area. Mike, can you help me?
The wetland mitigation, where you go to a wetland mitigation bank and you buy credits based upon whatever ratio it is that you're conserving. And then they recreate those wetlands at that particular bank.
And this doesn't apply to floodplains though, right?
This ordinance that we're talking about right now would pertain specifically to floodplains, which are different than wetlands.
So the
Sometimes they coincide.
floodplain, this digging out would have to occur near the site that you're building on.
Correct.
That's what I was trying to get.
If you would, just for council and maybe those that are interested, explain the difference between the floodplain, maybe wetlands, some of those common words that we hear, and how this might impact some of those areas.
Well, I guess we could utilize this graphic right now in front of us. So a floodplain is the limits of the flood during the storm event. So you would have to, so that's the extent of the flooding that we would normally see. A floodway is that narrow channel where there's moving water that conveys, that's, what's usually the speed of that floodway? 1 foot per second?
It's really where the velocity is, where the water's moving in general.
Yeah. So maybe with 6 Mile Creek, you would see an expansive floodplain, but more of a narrow floodway where you'd see the moving water. Wetlands can be in a floodplain, but they can also be somewhere else too. Wetlands can be found in areas where there's just a suspended water table, where you would actually see wetland growth. Sometimes areas along in a detention basin could be seen as a wetland as well.
Charlie, when you talk about the compensating factors, I had some experience with working with FEMA and flood, zones and that kind of thing when I was in banking, but my understanding was that on this kind of thing where you're talking about you add a foot here, you gotta take a foot off over there. I was always kind of that understanding, well, yeah, you built this up a foot, but your floodplain is maybe thousands of acres. So it doesn't really, it's not a one-to-one basis. Maybe raising your deal over here only makes the overall water go up this much or something. It's not, so, digging that hole across the street, maybe it's not necessary, it doesn't really do any good.
Right, I mean, especially in Brookings, the floodway, the floodplains are extensive, right? They're very shallow, they're extensive, so you may not see a significant issue if you put in a fill, right? But you do see a difference. Like Craig was explaining, the more we do it, the more we increase the velocity of that floodplain. The moving water, we increase eventually the overall depth of that floodplain as well. So you wouldn't necessarily see it for maybe a house that was built. You wouldn't see a significant increase across to the other side of the floodplain, but all those add up. They compound the issue.
So right now, Charlie, I'm sorry, to be asking all the questions. You're recommending a staff a 1-to-1 ratio. I see on there Des Moines, Iowa, for example, has a 1.5-to-1 ratio. All this is an added cost to the developer. What situation would you use a 1.5-to-1 ratio, or 2, or 1.5, whatever it is?
We see that a lot in area, Des Moines is an example here. We see it a lot because Des Moines has filled in most of their floodplain that's not in floodway, so they don't have a whole lot of storage left. So they're requiring more compensation if you do that, just to try to make up for what's happened in the past to some degree. They're also in a levee area where it's very sensitive to any increases in that floodplain in a levied area or have much greater impacts than obviously if you're not levied.
So this slide shows the proposed language that we're proposing for to address the compensatory storage requirement. And it includes the fact to do the 1-to-1 compensation and prohibiting the use of the detention basins that may be built in these floodplains as the suitable compensatory storage. They'd have to go above and beyond what the detention basin would hold. And it talks about some minor projects such as street parking lot resurfacing, rehabilitation, utility infrastructures that would not need to provide compensatory storage.
What is the date of the Sioux Falls, the latest adoption of their floodplain ordinance?
It was recent. Sioux Falls updated theirs within the last 12 months.
I'm not sure how far the compensatory storage requirement dates back. You recall?
I believe that was a new one I think that was an addition in this last update.
Okay.
If we were to adopt this, when does this happen for us?
If the language here is suitable, we could move forward with the first reading sometime in June.
Also, that this was an added cost for the developer. Is it a minor, significant? Can you give like a guess of how much of a difference in cost this would be?
I think for some developers and some parcels, this could be a significant cost.
If the city continues to develop more of its land, right, there's gonna be more of a desire to develop further into the areas, the fringes, especially the fringes of potentially the floodplain area. And so it's critical to council if you want to have laws in place to start considering this now, but you're right, there will be an added cost right now. It's 1 foot above floodplain, let's be taking it 2 foot, sort of additional feet of fill. And then if it's compensatory storage is a cost that has never been had before. Where not only are you potentially buying the land, but you might have to compensate some land to bring that into compliance with your new policy. So there'll be 2 added costs to the developer for this in order to build within those areas.
Is it required by law that the buyer knows they're in a floodplain? Sitting on that?
You go to get a mortgage and then you get checked and you have to then have flood insurance. And there are some zones that are still just, there's just no building along. I don't think you can,
Cause this is, the reduction is FEMA flood insurance, right?
Correct.
Which seems to me that some people might want it 3 feet above floodplain just to get that extra discount. I mean, I've heard that those premiums can sometimes be the same as the mortgage.
Yeah, they can be significant.
So
Which that would be by choice. We're requiring them to go to 2 foot. If they choose to go to 3 foot to get better insurance rate, they still could choose to do that.
that was a voluntary discount there, so that's if you're not in the floodplain and you want flood insurance, those are discounts. If you are in the floodplain and you do have a federally backed mortgage, you're required to have it regardless. That discount wouldn't apply if you're already in the floodplain.
I think the memo referenced that the 1 foot freeboard we have now was the minimum FEMA requirement at the time. Is it still 1 foot is the minimum FEMA requirement?
It is.
I have just a couple of questions. First, I want to thank everybody for the work on this because I think that this is something that we've really been needing to do for quite some time. And so I appreciate this, having this discussion. My question relates to basements. And what I'm wondering is, for the number of feet above the floodplain, does that include like the lowest level of the basement, or is that the lowest level of the above ground structure?
The way it's written right now, it's 1 foot above the lowest level of the lowest floor. So it would be 1 foot of, you would have to build your basement 1 foot above the flood. Well, the way it's written right now, but yeah, proposed would be 2 feet.
Okay. My other question is, throughout this, have we explored any options of the possibility of having, a overlay district or a zoning requirement or something where in some of these areas of floodplain or wetlands that basements not be allowed to be built in that space?
We have not explored that from what I know.
Do we know if that's a practice that anybody has in other communities?
I'm not aware of any.
Yep, I'm aware of some overlay districts or shoreland districts, if you will. Yeah, we expect particularly in communities where groundwater is an issue. And that they have identified, mapping where basements are at higher risk for some pump issues, if you will, and they have gone that. It would be a different ordinance than the one we're talking about here, but oftentimes it's written in a separate section.
Would that be more like a zoning ordinance or?
Yes, I believe so.
Mike, isn't there some building code requirements? I can't remember regarding testing of soils for basements. I can't remember what it is.
There might be some, but I mean, it would be on an individual structure by structure basis. And, I don't wanna steal anybody's thunder here, but the reality of this is when you're looking at these areas, most people are gonna fill the areas and remove them from the floodplain. So now you could put whatever floodplain overlay district on it you want, but it's no longer in the floodplain. So go through the floodplain development permit process, do the letter of map revision to remove it out of the floodplain. And so some of these things would come into play.
But before they could do any work within the floodplain, they would have to get a floodplain permit. Right, and with that, we could stipulate that any structure built on there would have to be 2 feet above.
And FEMA still considers it within a floodplain, right?
That's
So,
the process you go through is through FEMA, to remove it out of the floodplain.
But I think what Charlie's telling you is that there's an opportunity there to close that loophole within the city of Perkins through that. And so back to Councilmember Hawley's question, if there is a desire by council to have a separate overlay district on the floodplain or certain areas where you wouldn't build basements, that's a direction we need from you as a council. But for tonight, the recommendation before you would be 2 feet above the base elevation, but or the floodplain that would then give you the lowest floor, if it's a basement, would have to be that 2 feet above the floodplain. But if you want further restrictions where you would not be able to build a basement at all in those areas, then we just need that direction from you as well. We'd recommend bringing forward this policy or this change, that way you have at least this in place. If there's for that further desire to continue down that path.
There is,
I don't know if other council has council members have the desire to do that, but external to obviously this conversation, I do think it would be worthwhile to at least explore some kind of overlay district or something that could then limit the building of basements in both floodplains and wetland areas.
Steve, you have a comment?
The South Dakota, property disclosure form does, have a question, is the property located in a floodplain? So if you were selling an existing residential structure, you'd have to report that, information as to the status.
I have a question, how you said you could go through the fill and then not be in a floodplain anymore, and how you mentioned with Sioux Falls, the downtown, it fills up faster because it's different, it's not in a floodplain anymore. So would this change, have to come with any updates to like other stormwater drainage or any drainage plans and developments, since it would no longer put it affect when it came out of a floodplain at all?
So in order to, there was a scenario where someone wanted to fill in the floodplain. They would have to get a floodplain permit from the city, and then we would put, they would have to abide by our ordinance. And then within that, we could stipulate any structure would built on the property that they're filling would have to abide by the ordinance. So that's kind of how we would close any loophole that someone would try to find by raising it out of the floodplain and then building. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay.
Charlie, is this only going to be within the city limits, or will this be in the joint jurisdiction area?
The way, it would pertain to the city within the city limits. The way the floodplain ordinance is actually written, states that it could be utilized in the joint jurisdiction area as well, but, the zoning ordinance, the joint jurisdiction fucks with that, so it trumps that.
Okay, so the next question I would have is if the city was to accept a development that gets annexed in, they would have to follow these guidelines in order to be annexed in?
We, as a city, I think we could put stipulations that they would have to follow that. Right, if they got annexed in, then they would have to abide by our floodplain ordinance. If they wanted to be annexed in and they filled their property, we would make stipulation that they would have to follow this ordinance.
When we were discussing the, compensatory storage, Sioux Falls and Des Moines as some examples of cities that have similar restrictions or requirements. Are there any cities that have been doing it for long enough to know? We were pushing our problem onto somebody downstream from us, and with the compensatory regulations we have now, we've seen that lessened. Are there any case studies out there of adding this requirement seemingly working elsewhere?
I don't know that I'm not aware of any studies of the result, or, a lot of these have been implemented within the last decade. So this type of ordinance is really something you're going to see over a much longer period of time that benefits the overall benefits. So I'm not aware of any specific studies relating to the overall impacts. We have seen the overall impacts of, what happens when you don't have any flood storage left. So that's, yeah.
And did we come to, either of these numbers, like, through a formula or the median of looking at those other reference communities? Was it because we were wider by a certain margin, but then the 2 feet made more sense, or was there actually any, like, additional math that I just am not picking up on that was included?
I think we basically used our best judgment on that. We knew that the floodplain was extensive, and we felt that the 2-foot freeboard made the most amount of sense. And then as far as compensatory storage, we don't have the issues that maybe Des Moines has. So we didn't think it would be required to be as restrictive as Des Moines.
If we were to pass these changes, what projects would it then go into effect for? Would it immediately go into effect, and any projects that are currently proposed would have to comply with this? Is it just future projects?
I'd look to staff and the attorney to advise. My assumption is this would be, of course, it'd go to council, be approved in both June sessions, take effect in July, I assume. After that, any new projects that come forward, specifically new projects. As far as old projects, I think it'd be hard to retro old projects. But if a site were to blow down, you had to rebuild. I guess I don't know how the ordinance would be handled from that perspective. Yeah, say you took a site that was already developed on, had an older structure, decided to demolish it, raise the site. Would you then have to abide by this?
There are exceptions to this, and there's allowances that they can provide for variance for any development within that's less than in half an acre or less. And that would pertain to a home. So if a home was, damaged or wanted to be remodeled or leveled, they could apply for a variance.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. Thank you. Just one more, Holly, do you have any other questions?
No, thank you.
Move on to the next one.
If I may, real quick, so everyone knows, staff will plan on bringing this forward to you in June. I didn't hear any loud desires or voices to not bring it forward. We'll bring this forward to you in June. At that point in time, if you guys feel like there is a need for us to further study potentially a zone for no basement, I would encourage council at that point in time to make that recommendation at that meeting. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, we'll do first and second reading on it. All right, thank you very much.
Thank
The next item is presentation on the 2023 capital improvement projects. John Thompson, our Public Works Director, will review this item.
Actually, it's gonna be Charlie and I are doing
Oh, very good.
that tonight. We'll actually make Charlie do most of it. Good evening, John Thompson, Public Works Director. As you know, we've got a lot of projects going on this year. We've implemented a pretty solid outreach program before the construction season this year, and I think it's really kind of turned out really well for us. We haven't had a lot of calls. Alana is the one actually has been getting most of the calls. I think last time I looked, it was like 9 calls, right? So that's good. There's still a lot of stripe out there, and it's a little bit of delays on some of the roads. We'll continue to monitor to get those going. But tonight Charlie actually is going to go over all the other little projects. We have the storybook that we started up last year that contains all the projects, and then this year we started a new internet site called communityconstruction.inf, and that's going to have all the larger projects on it. What we're going to cover tonight is just basically the storybook, which you should have seen last year, so it'll just be kind of an overall, but it'll cover a lot of other little smaller projects. And then we'll answer any questions you guys have.
All right, so we'll start off with the map here. So obviously one of the biggest projects that we've seen for a while is the 22nd Avenue. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead here. Yeah, so that's, yeah, I was thinking of the interchange. 22nd Avenue Phase 2 project. As everyone I'm sure in this room knows, we've blocked off from Eastbrook Drive to 8th Street South and, for this project, we plan on, providing a shared use path on the east side, as well as new curb and gutter, new water main, increased, storm resiliency for the university, for the university, the Brookings Mall, the University Mall, and then then a new concrete surface for the roadway. That will include, widened lanes to make it more comfortable for everyone to drive in. I apologize for the disruption that everybody is facing right now. We're trying to get to IV and getting to the southern portion of the city. But we're working diligently just to try to wrap this up as quick as possible. Right now, the tentative completion date is November for the project, but we're hoping to accelerate that with some ideas that we've talked about, and hopefully we will be able to put those into action.
We got a good contractor on it. Everything is run smoothly so far. They've actually expedited some of the work and continue to give us quality related changes that will expedite the project as we move forward.
Another project that we're going to be doing is the Harvey Dunn Storm Sewer. This was on last year's projects list. Unfortunately, we got unfavorable bids for the project, so we postponed it to this year. We've included this with our annual overlay project, and we anticipate this to start in early June. This will provide storm sewer for this portion of Harvey Dunn from Main Avenue to First Avenue, and would provide an outlet for the food insecurity building for their stormwater system. We'll spin through some of these pretty quickly. Some of the quieter projects. 9th Street Mill and Overlay. This just involves a mill and overlay for 9th Street from First Avenue to 3rd Avenue. We also, as we've noticed, many of the alleys are in need of repair. One that really stood out to us was the alley near the old sanctuary. So as part of that, we were trying to pick off alleys and rebuild them, build 1 or 2 a year. And this is an alley that we've decided to address this year. It spans from 9th Avenue to Madera Ave. Nope, sorry. Crystal Ridge Mill and Overlay. This is a strict mill and overlay over on the Indian Hills area. Pretty cut and dry for us. This would be probably done sometime in the vicinity of June or July this year. Over on Remington and Cardinal, we're proposing some storm sewer upgrades over there. The road has seen significant issues with storm water and groundwater impacting the condition of the roadway. So as we go to resurface this roadway, we are proposing, we'll be installing some storm sewer from Remington to Deer Pass. And in the process, we'll resurface the entire roadway from Remington all the way to Hunter's Ridge. Here's the one I was looking for. Biggest project that we've seen in a little while here, 20th Street South Interchange. This project is nearing completion. They expect a completion date of July, which from the looks of things, they are well on their way to completing it by mid-July. They are in the process of paving the deceleration and acceleration lanes on the east side of the I-29 and have already paved the deceleration and acceleration lanes on the west side of I-29. So they are gearing up to do a significant amount of paving in June. to complete the project. As part of that Remington and Cardinal, we were planning to do Remington Drive, mill and overlay. Again, pretty cut and dry here. After the storm sewer goes in, we'll do a mill and overlay of the project. And complete all of Remington Drive. Cardinal Drives, circle, mill and overlay. Again, once the storm sewer is installed in Remington, we'll proceed with the mill and overlay of Cardinal Drive Circle.
Charlie, question on the storm sewer, what direction does that go? Where's it going?
Let's zoom out here a little bit. So the storm sewer is being installed and the drain towards 7th Avenue. When we were doing
I'm sorry to interrupt. I am not, I'm not able to see what you all are looking at. I just see the GIS link. Is there a way to get the other part up on the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Stop sharing.
Is that better?
Thank you. Yes, I can see it now.
So the storm sewer, as part of the 15th Street South and the 7th Avenue project that we completed last year, we extended the storm sewer into this neighborhood that previously didn't have storm sewer, to provide us with the opportunity to run it up Remington and bring it down the street here so that we could address the storm sewer issues that this neighborhood was facing. So it all drains down in this direction, down 7th Avenue, and then drains into the intersection here at 7th Avenue and 15th Street South, and then proceeds to the east. Another project that we've scheduled is the University Boulevard project. This involves providing sanitary sewer upgrades for the Innovation Campus. The project will span basically on University Boulevard from the PAC all the way to 22nd Avenue and then up to Miller Parkway. This is a 2-year project and it will be done in 4 stages. We are going to start with construction in the next few weeks on the University Boulevard portion. And that's scheduled to be, that University Boulevard portion is scheduled to be completed by August 17th, with the remaining construction season to focus in on this cross-country lane. In 2024, we'll proceed where we left off on University Boulevard, go down to 22nd Avenue, and go down 22nd Avenue to Miller Parkway. And that's scheduled to be completed by September of 2024. This will involve not only sanitary sewer upgrades for Innovation Campus, but upgrades to this intersection here, being a partnership with SDSU. The project will add a turn lane to go to the north out of University Boulevard, along with streetscape center island here to provide more of a grand entrance to the university. As part of another project within the overlay project, we have Calumet Road, which we're proposing which we'll be reclaiming this summer, sometime in the middle of the summer. Same with Teton Lane, we'll do a mill and overlay. And then we have our chip seal project. It was a bit of a challenge this year to find a location that we would not impact traffic due to the many projects that the city and BMU are providing, but we think we found locations within the city that would provide minimal disruption through traffic.
Just wanted to spread the pain.
But this serves as a valuable project to keep our roads in the shape they're in. And I've been in many communities Brookings has, the street system is in incredible shape. So we'd like to continue that. We can run through some park and rec projects as well. Pioneer Park band shell repairs are scheduled to be done this year. Licensed ice center dehumidification is being scheduled for this year to be done. That's for the licensed ice rink and the blue rink.
I might just go back real quick, that band shell actually is probably looking at next year because of the historic preservation and the way the project's evolving, so probably more likely next year, so.
Hillcrest Park pickleball court, that's probably gonna be designed this year, probably wouldn't be constructed until 2024. Hillcrest. And then it's an activity center, electrical work that's scheduled. Little Tykes playground replacement. And a Prairie Hills trail extension. This was a project that was started last year. It involves connecting, the shared use path that goes through the southern portion of or the northern portion of the nature park goes to Mid-Area Avenue and the gravel portion of Mid-Area Avenue and will proceed through the Prairie Hills development. In this direction, there's actually will be another portion that may be completed as well. That brings it all the way to Main Avenue. There's a variety of outdoor sports court repairs that will be done as well throughout the state.
Currently, the trail that is in that area there, is that pavement or is it gonna be concrete?
It's got concrete.
Okay.
Portion was stubbed out over here and then another portion was stubbed out over here. And then we're working to finish this portion in the coming months. Are there any questions?
On the University Boulevard project, that'll have the new center and median. Will that change the width of that street to accommodate the center and median?
Yes.
So, half of it will be completed by August of this year. The remaining part, will it be a narrower road then between that center median and 22nd Avenue then until 2024?
So the portion that's being done this year from basically year to year is going to be the 2-lane road that you see right now. So it's basically in the same location that you see right now. Next year would be the introduction of the center median, the turn lane, so that becomes significantly wider there to accommodate the center median and the turn lane.
So the center median doesn't begin until that point, that won't be constructed until next summer.
Correct.
Thank you.
And it's more to help accommodate the turning lane and to provide more of a greater entrance to the campus.
That's a great idea.
I have a question on kind of that entry point to campus, as you talked about. I'm wondering, since we're going to be redoing the street, I've seen in some communities where they have crosswalks close to their university, where the crosswalk might be school colors or might give some sort of nod to the university. And since we have to repaint lines anyway, I'm wondering if we might be able to explore whether or not that's an option to add to that entry point.
Always an option. We'd love to follow MUTC standards on crosswalks. I understand that down by the Children's Museum, you have a different colored crosswalk. And I believe within this SDSU on campus, they've changed a couple of crosswalks. We can definitely look at it.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, item 7, discussion on comprehensive plan amendments. My Structural Community Development Director will present this item.
I do want to mention is we do have, Charlie, he's, with RDG. He was one of the, team members that worked with on our comprehensive plan update, back in 17 and 18. So he's joining us via Zoom in case there's any questions, that, you may have for him, or I'm not able to answer. As I just referenced, we went through a comprehensive plan update, started in 2017, adopted, April of 2018. Quickly, just kind of going over what the comp plan is, you know, it's from a very, very high level. It's a vision of kind of where how the community is to grow, now and into the future. Really acts as a guideline. It helps support the land use decisions that the planning commission and the city council makes, but also to provide guidance to our developers, give them an idea to make sure that you know, what they want to do with their land fits within our overall vision. But more importantly, it's a very flexible document. At the end of the day, it's the landowners that make the decisions on how their property develops and what they want to see. So it changes, it needs to be flexible. Change is inevitable. Even over the last 5 years, we've seen a significant amount of changes in the community. And I think where this kind of originated is, there's a question of, you know, when is it appropriate for us to make amendments to our comprehensive plan? And so that's kind of where our discussion is being focused at tonight. And I'm a very creative individual, so. So at a very, very high level is your comprehensive plan. You know, you kind of look at it as kind of your 30,000 foot view. You try and utilize the best available data that you have at the time, to, you know, put together your comprehensive plan. But as you look at this diagram, each step as you move down, you know, in the triangle to the site plan, more and more detailed information and data becomes available. But at the comprehensive plan level, it's very, very high level data. Then as you move to the zoning level, you start to get a little bit more data, you start to understand some of the regulations that apply to those different districts in the community. I think right now the city has 21 or 23 different zoning districts that we administer. And then we have an overlay and plant and development district and I think an airport overlay. So we have a couple overlay districts on top of that as well. And then as you move down to the preliminary plat stage, that's where you get into, you know, I kind of look at it as kind of the 1,000 foot view, more detailed information where you get into your grading, your utility plans, your street networks, your drainage plans. And then as you move to the next step is your site plan. In Brookings, the site plan is more related to commercial industrial projects or large scale multifamily type projects. We don't quite get the level of detail on an individual single family residential home lot. We get the lot layout, we get the kind of the footprint of the house, but our, you know, like our landscaping requirements really don't apply as much to a residential lot for the single family, two family. But when you get into that multifamily and above, that's where you really get into the details, access drives with landscaping requirements, tree plantings. You'll get into lighting issues, signage, all sorts of those things. So as you move with each step of the process, more directly related to the individual site characteristics, more and more data becomes available to help in that decision-making process. So as part of the comprehensive plan, they do a current land use inventory, and it's just a good kind of feel for where you are from an existing conditions perspective. They take a look at your zoning map, but your zoning map and what's actually occurring doesn't always coincide or mesh together. So it's a good idea to get a feel for their existing conditions, get a feel for the density in the community. When you look at this map overhead, the lighter yellow color is actually low density residential. But most of that area north of Bay Street is in the R2 zoning, and so that's typically in our community, people feel like that's medium density, but when you look at it from a very general, high level perspective, overall, it's still low density. Also look at the floodplain, and then we look at our street network to make sure we really focus on trying to align our major streets, our arterials and our collectors. We don't try and necessarily dictate where our local streets go, but we want correct spacing for the collectors and arterials. Generally try and space our arterials if we can a mile apart, but they don't always coincide that way. But we look at their carrying capacity and their connectivity throughout the community to make sure that their traffic that is funneling their travel at a little bit higher speeds, carry a much larger volume, and then our collectors feed into our arterials, and then the locals feed into the collectors. One of the things that RDG did through the comprehensive plan process is they developed the development suitability model. And this is an example where they use the best available data at the time and kind of created a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being very few limitations and 10 being the most severe limitations. The caveat to this was any area that was located in floodplain was automatically given a 10, so severe limitations, but they looked at different things like depth of water, hydrologic group, the drainage class, wetlands, and a few other areas. And so they're looking at the characteristics, but please keep in mind, this is at a very, very high level. There isn't site-specific data that they were able to pull from. It's very generalized, something that they may have, some of the characteristics that are kind of found throughout these areas of the state, that they can kind of utilize that, with the exception of the floodplain maps. Those were adopted by FEMA, so they have defined boundaries. But that kind of helps lead us into our future land use map. And just, not only just the land use itself, but they're looking at the population trends, so the economic trends, looking at the current land use and making sure that we have compatibility. They utilize the development suitability model with the environmental concerns. And then the public input process. We did a number of individual stakeholder group meetings. We had a steering committee. They did community workshops at public open houses. And so it's all trying to establish that vision of what the community wants to be now and into the future. And then a little bit different than some of our previous comprehensive plans is we went with more of an intensity-based land use classifications. Our previous comp plans pretty much identified 3 types of land use categories: residential, commercial, and industrial. And so it's pretty generic here with the land use intensity. We get into low, medium, and high density residential. You also get into the urban, low, medium, and high density. And then there's also the open space, floodplains, different things like that. So when they identified some of the open space, floodplains, wetlands area, like I mentioned previously, if a floodplain was in the area, it's automatically given a model rating of 10. And so they encourage you to try and preserve those areas in open space. But as we know, change is inevitable. And so what is the appropriate process if we want to make amendments? And so there's 2 types of amendments you can make with the comprehensive plan, text and map amendments. We're predominantly been focused on the map amendments. So if a development proposal came through and there may not be consistency with our future land use map, we start to look at, is that development proposal still consistent with the overall vision of the comprehensive plan for the community? And if so, then we can move forward. But we may have to still go through the amendment process just to make sure that the map is appropriate, so that when it comes time for a zoning designation, that your comprehensive plan can support that zoning decision. And so, our approval process, state law requires that any amendments are done through the same process as the document was originally adopted. And so it requires public hearings at the planning commission level. They make a recommendation to city council, public hearing at the city council level. And then if the amendment is approved, it's done by resolution. That's how it was originally adopted. And so that's kind of the process that we go through. I think when we're looking at these things, some of the things to still keep in mind is, the future land use map is still at a very, very high level. And so I think one of the things that we've talked internally about staff is we've kind of created some of the issues ourselves just by having some of the software that we have available, because previously, up until 3 or 4 years ago when we got GIS, we look at maps on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and how can you tell exactly where that line is definitively? Now we have the ArcGIS, we're able to zoom in and we see, well, this line comes through this particular area. Half of the proposals in this category, half of it's in this category. So for consistency's sake, we've been really pushing those forward as map amendments to try and get it all so it's consistent. And that's why I think since we've adopted this, I think we've had 8 amendments to our future land use map. I think the largest one that we've had to date has entailed about 15 acres. But we've got to the point where some of them have been almost on a lot by lot basis. And so it feels like there's been a lot of amendments, but that's because, we have access to some software that allows us to get very, very detailed. With that, I guess I would open it up for any questions that you may have. And Charlie, if there's anything you would like to add, feel free.
Yeah, nothing terrible to add, just happy to answer questions. I think you covered it fairly well. We do these across the Midwest, and every community uses different district types, different regulations or policy guides for their future land use maps. And using the future land use map, just reiterate, is the policy document, the guiding document to inform zoning decisions. So there is flexibility even within one future land use category for several different zoning classifications that could fit that intent, pending how the site plan or the zoning district itself is structured. So, but I'll stop talking and be open for questions if there are any.
Holly, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Questions, comments from council? Okay.
I know the reason for bringing this forward, there's a couple of council members that wanted to know how we do future land use zoning, when is it appropriate to do it. I think there's a question about flood areas as well, and wetlands, that's what it was, on future land use maps. Did that answer your guys' question, Mike's presentation, or did you have any other questions? I just wanted to bring it back around, that was kind of the reason behind bringing this conversation forward. Why and how, when we do future land use map revisions.
I think the question I was gonna ask. I think it was good for us, you articulated that automatically all land that was designated in a floodplain was automatically assigned a 10. I think there have been a couple of times in the last year or two that an item has come before us that had gotten approval through the planning commission that existed in a floodplain, and it might have caught us by surprise. But I think you were able to articulate a little bit of maybe why that took a closer look, I guess, on those particular plans.
Yeah, and I think that's a good catch, and I probably didn't touch on that enough. Even the floodplain maps are pretty generalized, and I don't want to steal thunder from the previous discussions or anything, but I think that's part of the issues that we've had in the stormwater master plan getting it to date is because there's been some discrepancies. Even with what FEMA's proposing for floodplain maps, I mean, they're using data that's already over a decade old to try and update their maps. And, you know, John may jump up and punch me, but that's why we have Chief Drake here. But I don't agree with them because there's developers who have went through the FEMA process, followed the FEMA's process to remove from the floodplain, have developed, and they have since put them in the floodway. And so it doesn't make sense as they follow FEMA's process to remove themselves from the floodplain. And now FEMA put them in the floodway. And so some of that is concerning. We've got another or it's not even really a project, but we got a land use that's coming before us that their entire property is in the floodplain and they've had it surveyed and everything, and 20% of their properties out of the floodplain. So there's, you know, they utilize the best available data at the time, but sometimes it's at such a very, very high level that you start looking at it more site specific. And then you start to find out more of what's really happening. And sometimes they're bringing engineers earlier in the process to get that detail level at the site. So that they can make their case that, yeah, there's portions of it that might be in the floodplain, but there's also portions that are out. And there's things that we can do and we want to be careful with the floodplains. But it's also saying is, you know, it doesn't necessarily prohibit it. It's just, you have to look at it carefully and you might have to take some alternative measures. If development is to proceed forward in some of those areas.
Okay, any other questions, comments? All right, thank you, Mike. We'll review our meeting for the 23rd next week. Three proclamations. At this time, we don't have any change orders or first readings. We got a couple public hearings on temporary alcohol licenses. And progress report from the deputy city manager. And is there any council members that would like to bring an item before for a future agenda? All right, that being said, we're going to go into executive session. And when we're done with that, we will adjourn right after the executive session. There will be no business after it. So, enter an executive session pursuant to DSCL 1-2.3, consulting with legal counsel, or reviewing communications from legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters. Entertain a motion to enter the executive session. So